Mr. Chairman, on September 30th, 1938, one of the most tragic chapters in history was opened. The Reich Chancellor of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of France, Édouard Daladier, and the Prime Minister of Fascist Italy, Benito Mussolini, signed the so-called Munich Agreement. As we have mentioned before, the term used in Russian to translate the name of this deal is stelka, meaning collusion, which more accurately conveys the essence of the document that was signed. Under the agreement, Czechoslovakia was forced to cede the Sudetenland to Germany within 10 days, and the country's delegation was simply excluded from the negotiations. The Munich Agreement was the result of a treacherous betrayal of Czechoslovakia by England and France. According to the testimony of the Chief of Staff of the Supreme Command of the Third Reich, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, at the Nuremberg trials. We were extremely pleased that it did not come to a military operation, as we had always believed we lacked the means to breach Czechoslovakia's border fortifications. From a purely military standpoint, our attack would have broken like a wave against the breakwater of the border fortifications in the Sudetenland. As is well known, the primary outcome of this appeasement of the aggressor was years of the most devastating war in human history. Tens of millions dead, wounded and missing, the Nazi death camps, the Holocaust, famine, devastation, and countless other sufferings inflicted on millions of people. Mr. Chairman, today, the countries of the Western Alliance are deliberately distorting the outcomes of World War II, persistently denying the decisive role of the USSR in defeating the Third Reich and liberating Europe from Nazi domination. It's not surprising that they ignore manifestations of hatred within their own borders. For instance, in August of this year, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination gave a highly critical assessment of the situation in the United Kingdom. Its experts noted the continued problems of racism and violence against ethnic and religious groups, migrants and refugees, perpetrated by extremist far-right individuals and groups advocating for white supremacy. Against this backdrop, it is not surprising that collective Brussels, Washington and London continue to condone the crimes of the Kiev regime. They are unconcerned that the glorification of Nazis and their collaborators, the rewriting of history and the rehabilitation of those who served in Hitler's forces have been elevated to the level of state policy in Ukraine. Paramilitary organizations espousing neo-Nazi ideology are an integral part of the Ukrainian Armed Forces UAF and volunteer formations. The far-right radicals' adherence to a criminal ideology is evidenced by their actions against the civilian population of Donbass and in recent months against the residents of Russia's Kursk region. There have been numerous documented cases of Ukrainian neo-Nazis mistreating the local population, not to mention the incitement of hatred towards the Russian and Russian-speaking population, persecution of clergy and parishioners of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, forced Ukrainization, and much more occurring in Kiev-controlled areas of Ukraine. We note the special attitude of representatives of the Kiev regime toward memorable moments related to the activities of Nazis and their accomplices on Ukrainian territory during the Great Patriotic War. Let us cite a few recent examples. Billboards were recently put up in Lviv with the photograph of one of the leaders of the Third Reich. This was how they celebrated the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Brody, where the Red Army defeated the Banderites and Nazis. The glorification of Nazis is accompanied by a campaign against memorials dedicated to the liberating soldiers of the Red Army. News of vandalism against such memorials emerges with alarming regularity. In the Ivano-Frankivsk region, local authorities are planning the removal of 78 monuments. Recently, in the village of Sajava, located in this region, local authorities, with the support of far-right radicals, destroyed the grave of the radio operator and scout Antonina Gavrilovna Vereshchagina. The obelisk was demolished and her remains were exhumed. Such phenomena have also become the norm in Estonia. On September 20th, in the village of Tsuru in Voru County, the remains of 17 Soviet soldiers were exhumed from a mass grave. In July of this year, A similar incident occurred on the island of Saaremaa near the settlement of Tehumadi. The graves of hundreds of Red Army soldiers are planned to be relocated to a local cemetery without installing headstones bearing the names of the fallen Soviet soldiers and officers. In May of this year, employees of the Estonian Military Museum desecrated the burial site of 38 Soviet soldiers at the Tallinn Military Cemetery. Their remains were removed and reburied elsewhere. According to Estonian officials, there are up to 100 such burial sites remaining in the country, all of which are slated for removal by the end of 2025. Such actions by the authorities contradict Tallinn's obligations under Article 34 of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions of August 12, 1949, under which a state party to the document must respect burial sites of those who died as a result of military actions on its territory. Exhumation of remains is permitted only in exceptional cases and only after notifying the country of origin of the deceased. The sacrilegious desecration occurs against the backdrop of meticulous care for monuments to Nazi collaborators and even the erection of new ones. In July of this year, a monument to 2 Estonian legionnaires of the 20th Waffen-SS Division was solemnly unveiled in the town of Jõhvi in eastern Estonia. The Estonian Historical Museum once featured an exhibition dedicated to Nazi ideologist Alfred Rosenberg, describing him as one of the world-famous personalities born in Tallinn. What is this if not a blatant example of rewriting history? In Latvia, a veritable war has also been waged against memorials, monuments and mass graves of Red Army soldiers. Over 120 such sites have been demolished. Furthermore, in mid-September of this year, a decision was made to eliminate cultural objects, among them even a memorial stone to the great poet and writer Alexander Pushkin, evidently a casualty of the anti-Soviet legacy zeal. There are also discussions about the demolition of a memorial to the military commander Mikhail Barclay de Tolly. We view the lack of response from OSCE participating states and its relevant executive structures to the actions of the official Riga as tacit approval of these unacceptable actions and as encouragement for violations of our organization's relevant obligations. We call on the Western Alliance countries to also closely examine the facts outlined in the recent report by the Russian Foreign Ministry, which addresses the problems of neo-Nazism, racism, racial discrimination, and other forms of intolerance, and to take concrete steps to rectify this dire situation. Mr. Chairman, the examples we have cited today demonstrate that the uncomfortable issue for many countries, the rise of neo-Nazism, racism, historical falsification and related trends, continues to gain momentum across the OSCE region. In this regard, we reaffirm our country's principled position on the imperative to actively incorporate this issue into the work of the human dimension. We expect that future heads of executive structures, primarily the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, will finally begin to address these issues and provide them with principled public assessments. Thank you for your attention.